Greetings my friends and welcome to No Nonsense Metal Reviews. I'm George and today I'm back with another instalment of my favourite EPs. Now this was never a concept that was meant to spill over into two parts. If you have seen the first part that I did last week, then you'll understand the principle here that I personally believe that not all of the band's best material, or my favourite material anyway, is going to be found solely on the full-length albums. I think that a lot of good material, a lot of hidden gems, and a lot of well worth hearing stuff can be found on those releases in between the full-length albums, mainly on EPs. EPs, I feel, are often overlooked because, let's face it, if a release has only got maybe one, two, maybe a few more original tracks, maybe there's some demos, some alternative mixes, maybe a few live tracks. If you've just got that little sort of mismatch release, it's not going to draw as much attention as those bigger, say, 10, 12 tracks of the full-length albums. They're just not going to have that same pull. And also on a full-length album, because you've got that much more material, of course, it's got however many more chances of achieving a big hit, or a relatively big hit, I should say, tracks or multiple tracks that stand out big enough to get radio play or make it into the live set list. Anyway, so last week I originally set out to do my five favourite EPs. That ended up being 6 with 2 honourable mentions. After that, I realised just how many great EPs I'd missed out. I was going through my collection, which is pretty extensive, and I was kicking myself on numerous occasions about how the hell could I forget this? How could I leave out that? What about this one? So, it had to be a two-parter. So I'm back with this time 5. So these are the next 5 with 1 honourable mention. So, without further ado, I still can't understand how I forgot about this. Slayer, the Haunting the Chapel EP. What a brilliant EP this is. This was released in 1984. This was following on from the debut album Show No Mercy, bridging the gap very nicely before Hell Awaits dropped and just blew the thrash metal world wide open. What I really love about this EP, the Haunting the Chapel EP, although it is only 4 tracks long, I think originally it may have been 3, but now we've got the addition of Aggressive Perfector on there. I think it shows perfectly where they were going, where Slayer were going from Show No Mercy, where they did sound and were definitely very firmly rooted in traditional heavy metal, but with a more aggressive, thrashier edge, of course. More Venom than Iron Maiden, shall we say. But then we know that they went on to release Hell Awaits, which is a thrash metal masterpiece. And this EP has all the aggression, all the great riffs of Hell Awaits, but it's still clinging on a little bit to that earlier style from Show No Mercy, and it's a great gap fill. It does show the progression, and you get some killer tracks here. Chemical Warfare, thrashing, heavy metal, brilliant stuff, great riffs. The overall production on this EP is not wonderful. No, this is a digitally remastered version, whatever. But there's a few little gaps and little blips in the mix that you can still pick out. And actually it just helps to add to the aesthetic, the appeal, that it's a rough, raw, nasty, ungodly release. Chemical Warfare, as I say, what a classic. Absolute Slayer classic. Captor of Sin actually is one of my favourite Slayer songs. It is a ripper. It's been covered by numerous bands, it's been played live, blah blah blah. It is a bloody ripping track. Great number. And the title track, if you will, Haunting the Chapel. Another great thrashing, just energetic number. Really good songs. I will include Aggressive Perfector on this because it's on my version. It says it's an extra track here. Not as good a version here as what we get as a bonus sort of re-recorded version, if you like. That featured as a bonus track on Rain in Blood, certainly on the remasters later down the line. But still a great, rough, raw, thrashing number. Slayer, 1984, Haunting the Chapel, a thrash essential. If you love your thrash, if you love your great riffs, and you're not familiar with this one, it's, as I say, EPs are all too often overlooked. This is a classic, of course, but if you love thrash, if you love good riffs, check that one out for sure. So sticking with thrash, we're going to go with another little band that you may have heard of, Sacred Reich, riffing all over the place, and this is the 1988 EP, follow-up to their debut album Ignorance. This is Surf Nicaragua. This is a fantastic EP. It's full of energy, it is harsh, it is metal, it is ripping, killer stuff. Very aggressive, you get lots of attitude, sort of punk angst in there, and you get some killer tracks. The title track, Surf Nicaragua, is a brilliant thrashing number, really good killer riffs, and vocally we get a very strong vocal performance from Phil. There's the guys, full of attitude, full of energy, just metal as hell. Surf Nicaragua, great track. One Nation, another absolutely brilliant track, very thrashing. Draining You of Life, that's the only other, you only get the three sort of original material tracks there, but they're all very well worth hearing. Very much in the vein of Ignorance, but somewhere between that and the much more, I guess, refined style of The American Way, the follow-up, but we get a great, and I say this genuinely, a great cover of Black Sabbath War Pigs, and they do a really good version. It's not a rip-off, you know. Phil's not trying to sound like Ozzy. He's just trying to do a good vocal performance, but the riffs are great. It just sounds really good. And then we get two live tracks at the end there. We've got Ignorance and Death Squad, and they're both energetic. They're both thrashing as hell, and they are guaranteed to get you headbanging along. So there we have it. Sacred Reich, Surf Nicaragua. An underground thrash metal essential, a classic, and a well-renowned piece of material. Again, I was kicking myself for forgetting that one. Slightly more obscure here. We're going with the little name you may have heard of, Mr. Jason Newsted, formerly of Voivod, formerly and most notably of Metallica, of course. But when Jason came back with his own band, Newsted, very short-lived it was, yes. But Newsted, they were brilliant. They had two releases. This was the EP Metal, and then they had one full-length album, Heavy Metal Music. Names aside, I don't think either of those are particularly good release names, but this EP featured 4 tracks, original material, from Jason doing the vocals, and he did a really good job of handling the vocals on this. He's got a great, harsh bark to him. He's got that almost Phil Anselmo sort of harshness to his vocals, not in the way that Phil has. He's got a very broad spectrum of vocal capabilities, maybe not so much anymore with the high pitch that he was able to do back on Cowboys from Hell days, but he's got a very rough, very harsh, very husky vocal delivery. Jason does that really well. So Jason handles the bass, of course, and the vocal duties. But he was joined, I should say, as this is now defunct, sadly, by Jesse Farnsworth, guitars, bass, backing vocals, and Jesus, or Jesus, however you want to pronounce it, Mendez Jr. on drums and percussion. So, not a massive supergroup, not an overinflated, bloated, egocentric project, with loads of different musicians coming and going. It was just Newstand and a couple of other guys, but the 4 tracks here are killer. It is, I would say, heavy metal music. It's got little elements of thrash in there. Certainly on the opening track, Soldier Head, which is heavy as hell. I challenge you to listen to that and not want to just leap around your living room flailing like a madman. Godsnake has a bit of a doom tinge to it. It's very chuggy. It's got plenty of great bass notes, great riffs there. It's a very heavy track. King of the Underdogs, again, guaranteed to get you moving, guaranteed to get your head banging along. And Skyscraper, another good heavy metal track. So this EP, I cannot believe I forgot about this one, but I absolutely loved it when I first heard it. Loved it when it came out. I loved that debut album, that soul album they did, and I wish they had carried on, because no doubt this would have been a big project. Absolutely. So Newstand with metal, this is a killer EP. Not one to be missed if you love heavy metal, if you love thrash, if you love Jason Newstand. We're going to go heavier now. We're going to go extreme. We're going to go with one of my favourite death metal bands. I'm going to say death metal because they are, for the large portion of their history, they have been a death metal band, but they've had flourishes of grindcore in the early days, melodic death metal, death and roll. They've kind of tried it all. They've had their fingers in a lot of different pies. But Carcass, as I say, are one of my favourite extreme metal bands, and they are just fantastic musicians. You've got that iconic duo of Bill Steer on the guitars there and Jeff Walker on vocals and bass. And this is the Despicable EP. And this came out in 2020. 4 tracks. 1 track, Under the Scalpel Blade, which features on the follow-up album, Torn Arteries, and then 3 other original tracks. This release was designed, I suppose, to bridge the gap between the great comeback Surgical Steel after about 17 years, I think it was, of inactivity. They came back, they released that album, and that is one of, if not my favourite Carcass albums, but it's also just a superb piece of work. It's a smelting pot, if you like, of death metal, melodic death, thrash. It's just a masterpiece. Such good songs, such good musicianship. It was a long time coming trying to follow up such a good album as that. And to bridge the gap between Surgical Steel and Torn Arteries, they released this EP, Despicable. COVID, the global pandemic, caused them to have delays and issues. They couldn't get the album done, or they weren't able to release Torn Arteries anyway as soon as they wanted to. However, they decided, instead of just essentially doing nothing and waiting, to do this EP, Despicable, and you get 4 amazing tracks. The Living Dead at the Manchester Morgue is an absolutely crushing number. You get these huge riffs, you get so much groove, and Bill Steer's guitar work is phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. Jeff's vocals are nasty and absolutely ungodly. Just a great track, killer track, that one in particular. Probably my favourite of the EP. But we get the long and winding Bier Road, and Slaughtered in Soho as well, that just feature on here, and they are, again, very good tracks. Lots of great riffs, lots of great vocal delivery, rumbling bass, crushing drums. It's just a freaking great release, and it just fits in so perfectly with what they achieved after with Surgical Steel, and then where they went next with Torn Arteries. So, Carcass, Despicable, a genuine highlight and a fantastic release. If you like old school death metal, if you like thrash, this release has got a little bit of all these different elements thrown in there, and it's certainly not one to miss. So, we're on to the final pick of my next 5 choices, and this one, another one that I just don't understand how I quite forgot it. I would say that it's certainly my favourite material from this band's early years. This was released in 1995, and it is by black metal, death metal titans, Behemoth with And the Forest Dreams Eternally. Now this is the very nice recent reissue media book version. I do have a copy in a box set as part of a box set collection, but that artwork and the original artwork is just so haunting, it's chilling, it's just brilliant, and it sums up the music here perfectly. What Behemoth achieved with their debut and with the follow-up album, Grom, we had a lot of, I guess you could say, more orthodox, but a bit more aggressive anyway, black metal, traditional black metal. And with a track like the opening track, Transylvanian Forest, it's very raw, it's very frosty, it's cold, it's bleak. It's black metal, it's traditional black metal, but it's done in Behemoth's way. That's a great track, absolutely. But take a track like Moonspell Rites, and that is a far bigger, grander sound. It's almost gothic, it's mournful, it's dark, it's deep, it's emotive, it's got a lot of different elements, it's a far slower pace as well, it's almost like a funeral dirge. It's a great track, very atmospheric. Then we get, and I've always butchered the pronunciation, so I'm just going to say Storming Near the Baltic. We get, I guess, more of that early black metal, but it's just a little bit more. It's a little bit too refined, too heavy to be just conventional black metal. But although it is in the black metal style, certainly the black metal structure of the song, it's aggressive stuff. It's harsh, it's heavy, it's nasty, but it's definitely Behemoth. Then we get Pure Evil and Hate, which just takes elements from Venom, Motorhead, from Bathory, throw that all together, blend it up in the black metal blender, throw in a bit of Behemoth spice and a little bit of death metal in there, and you've got this rockin' rollin' black metal, heavy metal, great, powerful track. Really uplifting stuff, the sort of stuff that where you can just grab a beer, such as this, and you can headbang along to with great ease. And it's completely different from what they had been working on and writing prior to this release with that debut album. But it's an absolutely great, ripping track. So, we've also got Forgotten Empire of Dark Witchcraft. Let's just appreciate how great those song titles are. Some of these track titles, absolutely brilliant. Again, it's a heavy, nasty, raw. It's a very raw release, and it sounds great. It's full of energy. It's full of hate and evil. It's very dark and bleak, but it is Behemoth sounding amazing when you consider this was their second release, following on from the debut, an EP in the middle there. It sounds great. It's absolutely brilliant stuff. Behemoth and the Forest's Dream Eternally. I love that title. I love that cover. It's such a good release. If you're not familiar with this era of Behemoth, maybe you've heard the massively successful I Loved You at Your Darkest, or The Satanist, or even a release like Satanica, or the new album, which I have not yet heard, disgracefully. But go back to the origins, explore this, explore Storming Near the Baltic, explore Grom, and you'll be pleasantly surprised, no doubt. Certainly if you like black and death metal, black metal, raw and ready stuff. So, there's my 5. Just to recap, we had The Mighty Slayer with Haunting the Chapel. We had Sacred Reich, Surf Nicaragua. We had Jason Newsted, Metal. Great name. Just a little bit unimaginative. Carcass with Despicable. Then, of course, we have Behemoth with And the Forest Dream Eternally. Now, I do have one honourable mention. Now, the honourable mention comes in the form of Motorhead, the Golden Years live EP. Now, the reason why, and there is a good reason, why this actually didn't feature as one of my favourite EPs is because essentially, although I know the material well on here and have heard these tracks in this form countless times, I didn't know that this EP existed, really, until I may have heard the name, maybe seen it on eBay or whatever. But I didn't know the content, shall we say. Now, I'll give you the full story. If you are familiar with the reissue series of their albums, of Motorhead's catalogue, you will no doubt be familiar with the bonus tracks, the live bonus tracks on Bomber. Those live bonus tracks are in fact the live tracks that we get here on the Golden Years EP, recorded in and released in 1980, I believe. So these tracks are the same. This is exactly it. And as Bomber is one of my favourite Motorhead albums, I had heard those tracks countless times. And in fact, the version of Too Late, Too Late that we get here, and also Dead Men Tell No Tales, are, in my opinion, better than the album studio versions. No doubt whatsoever. But I didn't know that this was an entity, really, until I was talking about this whole concept of choosing my favourite EPs. I was talking to my dad about it and expressed the fact that I'm probably going to have to do another one, another instalment of my favourite EPs, as there's just too many. And he said, well, if we were talking about EPs, you've got to be talking about Motorhead, the Golden Years EP. Of course, I didn't quite know that. Fast forward about 12 hours after that conversation, as I went to town. There's a market stall that sells records. I just happened to be flicking through the box of 7-inch singles, the very small box that covers metal music. And what do I see? I see Motorhead, the Golden Years live EP for a couple of pounds. And I thought, that's a really weird coincidence. There's some sort of divine guidance there, clearly. So, fast forward to listening to this, making the connection, realising that actually I knew these songs well and I really, really like these versions. I think it sounds great. I thought, I can't not mention Motorhead. This is a live EP, yes. I wasn't familiar with it in this form, no, but these are killer versions. If you haven't heard this, this is Motorhead, raw, rough, ready. Sounding great. No, this is not No Sleep Till Hammersmith quality. But this is a really great little issue, great little EP that fits snugly between the absolutely mighty Bomber and, of course, the follow-up album, Ace of Spades. So there we have it. Motorhead, live EP, The Golden Years. That is indeed my honourable mention. So, what do you think of these choices? I'm probably still forgetting more, but Anyone else share the attraction for these particular choices? Anyone else a fan? What do you think of these particular releases? I am very interested to hear. Thank you very much for watching. Hopefully there won't be another instalment of favourite EPs, because I can't think of too many more that I have forgotten, but you never know. We will not say never. Thanks for watching. Feel free to like and subscribe as always. It's very much appreciated. You take care, my friends. Check back soon for all things heavy. Plenty more reviews to come. Take care, my friends. Stay heavy.